We keep losing you, Shab, but you're back now. Can you hear us and see us?
I can hear and see you. Can you hear and see me?
I can. So this is an interesting time for the UK Labour Party, for the UK. I suspect that if he doesn't make progress very quickly, people have short attention spans in politics in general. Social media has made everything much quicker. And then you have a country like the UK where Liz Truss couldn't outlast a lettuce. I don't think he has a honeymoon like other prime ministers may have. Keir Starmer didn't have a honeymoon. We should remind everyone at home that the man won a landslide election victory, one of the biggest Labour landslides in history, and yet he's gone in 2 years.
Absolutely. Look, it's literally 2 years ago that he was walking up that street, the same street he was on just a few hours ago, where people were waving flags, and we were talking about the fact that he had delivered one of the largest landslide victories that the Labour Party had seen ever. And within 2 years, the Labour Party and the MPs have decided that, quite frankly, they don't have confidence in him. They don't believe he is the right person to be leading their party. And it's because the polls have turned on him so fast. And it's an indication of how quickly things can change. It's also an indication of how normal it has become in the United Kingdom to change political leader. This was not really the case before.
No.
You usually stuck with your party leader for a while. The Tories started this. Labour had clearly decided that, yeah, we can do the same. They've got rid of Keir Starmer. They've now gone for Andy Burnham. He wasn't an MP a couple of months ago. He's now the Prime Minister. The pressure will now be on for him to deliver, and whether he can or not will define his time in office. We haven't seen this huge jump in the polls for Labour. They're not miles ahead now they've got a new leader. They've slightly closed the gap on reform in Nigel Farage. Labour MPs will be waiting to see whether Andy Burnham, who's been viewed as this sort of king over the water, this messiah who's coming back to save the party, whether or not he can actually deliver.
Before we talk about the cabinet selections, a couple of things. One is, if you're watching on YouTube or Substack, stick your questions in the comments. We'll try and get through some questions today while we chat. There's a lot going on. It's a breaking news day in the UK. I should also point out that he spoke, I just saw there in the two clips we played, without a lectern, without a podium. Keir Starmer, as he left today, did speak from a podium, from notes. He wasn't the greatest of speakers. I've always struggled to understand how he was Director of Public Prosecutions as a barrister. You would think lawyers would be really good at speaking, and Keir Starmer's never been a great...
He probably uses notes quite a lot.
Well, he's just not a good speaker. Andy Burnham speaking without notes. Some people might say, oh, it's a parlour trick. It's David Cameron famously. I'm old enough to remember when David Cameron made his pitch for the Conservative Party leadership at the conference in 2005. He spoke without notes, and everyone went, wow, look at this young man speaking without notes. On the one hand, it is superficial. It's not about, it doesn't tell us anything about what his policy agenda is going to be, how strong or decisive a leader he's going to be. On the other hand, as you and I have discussed before, communications are vitally important in an era where Elon Musk is funding lots of people who hate you, he's got an algorithm that's turning people against you at a time when the right-wing press is as anti-Labour as it's always been. It's useful to have a leader who can actually defend its record. I'm here in the US where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were both not great communicators. Biden was very old and Kamala Harris was very wooden and relied on her notes a little bit too much. Do centre-left parties need people who can actually talk like normal people and communicate with normal people?
Look, you mentioned the examples in the United States. In the United Kingdom, we've got Nigel Farage, who usually does not use notes when he delivers speeches, is very natural, answers questions when approached by members of the public, and clearly it's working in the polls. His party is polling very well. Keir Starmer is not like that. You mentioned today when he was delivering his farewell address in Downing Street, he was reading off his notes, as he always does. It's a little bit more wooden. It's a little bit more stiff. Andy Burnham didn't do that. We are in a world where personality politics in particular is very powerful. We're in this social media age where your ability to communicate matters more than ever before. We've seen it with Donald Trump. We've seen it with Zohra Mamdani. Those who are able to actually talk, who are actually able to engage, who are actually able to feel human tend to do a lot better. And that is what Andy Burnham is supposed to be good at. That is one of the main reasons why MPs have decided to go with him. It's because he has that skill that Keir Starmer didn't have. And so far, I was doing a panel on BBC Newsnight the other day, and David Yellen, the former editor of The Sun, described him as Britain's first social media prime minister. And he basically is. He's the first time we've got someone who is really personable and is able to use social media and able to interact with people on a more human level. We haven't had that from Keir Starmer.
Although he's not a young leader, I should point out he's older than me, which makes him old. If you're older than me, you're old.
And he's got a lot of experience as well. He's been in Westminster for a long time. I know he's taken a little gap in his gone away to Manchester, but before that he was serving as an MP, he was a minister under Gordon Brown, he served in the cabinet. He's got a long, extensive experience in British politics. The man will know what he's doing when it comes to Westminster.
So we don't just have a new Prime Minister in the UK today, we have a whole new cabinet. Give us a summary of who are the new people, who are the big jobs?
Well, this is going on as we're talking, so I might interrupt you in about 10 minutes time or so when I get really excited because there's been a new appointment. But what we have so far is we've got the Chancellor is John Healey. He was the Defence Secretary. He actually resigned as Defence Secretary for Keir Starmer on the day that we soft launched, or the day after we soft launched. That was the very first big bit of news we had to cover as a Tear UK. And
he resigned because we didn't spend enough money on defence, and now he gets to be in charge of spending.
Absolutely. So we don't actually know what John Healey stands for when it comes to the economy. He's never really been one to speak much about economics. He doesn't have a particularly economic-based background. We don't know what his vision for the country is. What we do know is he thinks we should spend a lot more money on defence, so that might be what's coming when it comes to his next budget, but we'll have to wait and see. We've got Ed Miliband, who was initially tipped to be the Chancellor, someone who has got a history of economics.
I know him a bit. I know Ed Miliband. I've heard of him.
Have you? I feel, if I remember correctly, someone on this panel might have written a book about Ed Miliband in the past. Ed Miliband, we thought, was going to be Chancellor. He was being repeatedly briefed as the man who could get the keys to the Treasury. He's got a long history of working in the Treasury. He's viewed as a domestic policy expert. He didn't get the job. He ended up getting Foreign Secretary, which is still one of the biggest jobs in the cabinet. That's the role he'll be doing. The other person who we thought was going to potentially be the Chancellor was Shabana Mahmood. Yep. She stays as Home Secretary, so she...
I don't know what's worse, that she stayed as Home Secretary, a job where a lot of us are very upset with what she's been doing on the migration front, on the public protest against Gaza front, or... should we be happy she didn't get the Chancellor's job because that's such an important job and we don't even know what she thought about the economy. We know that she's said that Margaret Thatcher is a hero of hers. So it's a weird one. I know she wanted to stay at the Home Office because she thinks she's doing fantastic work. The media loves her.
Yeah. And interestingly, I was told that there was a conversation that took place between Shabana Mahmood and Andy Burnham. I think it was either last week or the week before. It all sort of blends together after a while, in which that was the first time there were conversations about what she could potentially do in the future. And she was very, very insistent that she wanted to stay on as Home Secretary. She felt as though it was unfinished business. She hadn't got to finish the work that she'd started when it comes to bringing down immigration numbers. Some people on the left aren't particularly happy about that, but that's the task that she is currently working towards. Interestingly, all the conversation for the last week or so has been, is Shabana Mahmood or Ed Miliband going to be Chancellor? And in the end, neither of them have been picked. It's been John Healey, which has taken all of Westminster by surprise. None of us thought that's what was going to happen. That's the direction he's gone in. It's potentially quite clever, I should say, before we sort of wrap up the conversation about the big jobs, because whoever he had picked, whether it was Shabana Mahmood or Ed Miliband, there would have been people who were unhappy. There would have been conversations that he had been convinced by briefings by one side or the other. By choosing someone who wasn't even in the frame, according to what we know, it ends that conversation completely. There's now no conversation about whether or not he's been swayed by Team Mahmood or Team Anti-Miliband or Team Miliband.
Could still backfire on him big time because Healey is being described as a pair of safe hands, but that description is often offered to people who don't have their own vision, don't have their own kind of ideological preferences. We know that Andy Burnham wants to control a lot of these departments, including Treasury out of Downing Street. So is John Healey going to be a yes man? But the bigger question is, Andy Burnham's big thing was, I'm going to be the one who pushes back against neoliberalism. I'm the soft left guy who's going to do something about the economic model. He talked about it again today in Downing Street. He talked about taking on, the privatization agenda and the rest. If you're going to do that, it would be helpful, as John McTiernan, former Blair advisor, wrote for Zeteo UK this morning, it would be helpful if you're decisive, if you have a clear vision, if you have people around you with a clear vision. And Ed Miliband, whatever you think about him, had a clear vision for the economy, understands the Treasury, served in the Treasury under Gordon Brown for many years, has done a very strong job at the Energy Department. Some people don't like his plan, but no one denies that he's been implementing a plan. And you didn't go with him, and you decided to go with either Shabana Mahmood, who's never spoken about economics in the last 5-10 years that people can remember, or John Healey, who also doesn't have any kind of critique of neoliberalism that we know about, and also wants to spend more money on defence. They want to spend more money on defence. Today, Burnham says he's going to turn adult social care into a kind of NHS model, free at the point of use. They've got a triple lock on pensions. All things, well, not the defence, but many of the things I'm pro, But none of that's free. It's going to cost a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think you've hit the nail on the head with one thing in particular. I think what this appointment tells us more than anything else is that Andy Burnham wants a lot of control over the Treasury. He wants to control what the Treasury does through number 10. Prime ministers have tried to do that before. They've found that very difficult. I was in Downing Street. This is an anecdote which is slightly tangential, but I was in Downing Street when Boris Johnson got made Prime Minister on that evening, in which he had decided that, you know what, number 10 and number 11, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister were going to share a set of advisors, that no longer would the Chancellor have their own independent advisors. And actually what would need to take place is that all the Chancellor's advisors would be fired, and instead we're going to have one set of advisors so that he can essentially have control over the Treasury. And it ultimately led to Sajid Javid resigning and Rishi Sunak becoming the Chancellor. Now, we've seen this before. Prime Ministers trying to do this. It's very difficult to do. The Treasury is a hell of a beast, and it's a very difficult government department to control from number 10. If that's the goal here, that is going to be very difficult to achieve. On the other side is the other thing that you mentioned, which is incredibly important, is a lot of what Andy Burnham wants to do is going to cost money. We've heard about him talking about raising the threshold before you start paying tax. That is not a cheap policy. That has been frozen for years to save the Treasury money, to raise money for the Treasury via fiscal drag. These are not going to be easy things for him to do. How he funds them is going to be the defining feature. He talks about this 10-year plan. We don't know what that is. We don't know how much that's going to cost. We will find out at the next budget. So John Healey has got a hell of a task on his hands. He's supposed to be the safe pair of hands. I actually interviewed him very recently when the Iran war kicked off. I was covering it in my previous job in Cyprus on an Air Force base, Akrotiri, where he came in to visit. And that was the description I heard over and over and over again. In the lead up to that interview, when I was calling around, when I was trying to prepare questions, everyone I spoke to in the Ministry of Defence would say, oh, it's a very safe pair of hands. So that's clearly why they've gone for him.
Although the Treasury is a department that can break even the safest of hands.
Yeah,
interesting, you talked about funding. Let's take some questions from our viewers and subscribers on YouTube and Substack. Harry, I hope I'm getting this right. Harry Setti 2454 on YouTube says, given the transformative rhetoric, surely all of this will require genuine consideration of economic tactics like wealth taxes on the ultra rich. The appointment of Healey doesn't signal such a shift. It's a fair point.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is a fair point. Like you said, for all the talk we've had of transformative politics, the end of neoliberalism, Andy Burnham moving in a direction that we've not seen before, picking John Healey, who again is a very safe pair of hands, someone who has been around politics for a long time. He served under Blair, Brown. He's been in and around the Labour Party for years and years and years. He's a centrist. He doesn't really rock the boat. The reason why his resignation as Defence Secretary was so significant is because he doesn't really pop his head above the parapet very often, would suggest that they are not going to go for this transformative type of politics. However, we don't know the conversation that's happened behind closed doors. It is very possible that Andy Burnham has sat John Healey down and said, listen, this is what I want to do. I'm going to go for wealth taxes. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I want a safe pair of hands to deliver that.
Yeah.
Yes. Will you do that?
We will find out soon enough.
And he may have turned around and said, yes. There's a real world scenario in which he has turned around and said, I don't really have an economic vision, but I'm going to sign up to yours and I'm going to deliver it. We don't know.
Okay. John Healey is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Louise Haigh is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, effectively a number 2 to Burnham, very loyal ally of his. She had left government over a conviction that she hadn't mentioned. She's back now. We've got Yvette Cooper has gone from Foreign Secretary to Health Secretary, I believe. Ed Miliband is now the Foreign Secretary. We have Shabana Mahmood, as you said, staying at Home Secretary. David Lammy is out. Rachel Reeves out. These are loyal allies of Starmer, the Foreign Secretary, and the Chancellor gone. Whether they cause trouble on the backbenches will be very, very interesting to see. I'm sure neither of them are happy to be gone. Let's talk about Ed Miliband. We got a couple of questions about Ed Miliband, the new Foreign Secretary, which I'm sure the Trump administration will be paying attention to as well. Dance Little Squire on YouTube says, could Miliband as Foreign Secretary be slightly more defiant on Israel, a la his Syria bloc in the 2010s? For those of you who don't remember, when there was a plan to bomb Syria during the Assad time, during the Obama period, Ed Miliband, as leader of the opposition, refused to get on board and didn't provide the votes for that. But then J Ray J9J on YouTube says, is he, Edward Miliband, full name, A yes man for Burnham. So two slightly different questions there. One suggesting, given his past, will he be a bit more defiant on foreign affairs, especially in the Middle East? Because that's what he was when he was leader of the opposition. Or is he just going to be a yes man for Burnham?
Yeah. First of all, I'm enjoying you reading out usernames. I think that's the best part of these.
YouTube usernames are the best. We're going to do Substack next.
This is absolutely brilliant. In regards to Ed Miliband as Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Secretary role has evolved and changed a lot in recent times. As the world has modernized, as we've globalized, Foreign Secretaries, as important as that role is, they actually do a lot less in terms of defining foreign policy, because foreign leaders now talk to each other so often. Foreign leaders now meet so often. It is much easier now to hop on a plane and go and have a meeting with one of your counterparts than it was before. In fact, it would be very odd if global leaders decided to meet and Andy Burnham decided not to go and sent his foreign secretary instead. The issue with that means is that for the Foreign Secretary is, for all intents and purposes, a yes man. They have to follow the direction of the Prime Minister. And ultimately, the Foreign Office and Downing Street do decide foreign policy, and the Foreign Secretary has to go with it. I'm not entirely convinced they actually have that much agency to shift policy. Behind closed doors, they are obviously intimately involved in the conversations that take place, but it will ultimately be up to Andy Burnham to decide the foreign policy direction of the government, and it will be up to Ed Miliband to represent the government when it comes to attending other events that foreign secretaries go to. The Prime Minister will be attending the major events, the G8s, the G7s, the G20s, speeches at the United Nations. Those are usually done by the Prime Minister.
So it's interesting, you and I were speaking before we went on air, and it's worth repeating what we were discussing, which is you've been watching the news today in the UK, the mainstream media coverage of Burnham, and the only place where foreign policy has reared its head really is on the subject of Ukraine. What was Starmer's legacy on Ukraine? What will Andy Burnham do on Ukraine? Even though the issue that's going to dominate his inbox, his in-tray, his attention as new Prime Minister is Iran, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, whether you like it or not. And that's when people are, why do we have to talk about the Middle East? That's where the action is. And I use the word action not in a complimentary way. Donald Trump has been attacking Iran for 9 days straight now since his MOU, his Memorandum of Understanding, fell apart. Keir Starmer, of course, belatedly stood up to Trump and said, well, we're not going to take part in this. Trump then attacked Starmer over it. There's a lot of questions over where Andy Burnham goes on this. On Substack, Dakota Collar asks, what do you make of the potential of Burnham just backing Trump and aiding Israel further to placate the right like Starmer did? I hope Labour gets their shit together, says Dakota Collar. It's a big question. Steve Reed, Steve was the cabinet minister. Who's the mayor of Liverpool?
Former cabinet minister.
Who's the Liverpool mayor I'm thinking of? Burnham's pal.
The Metro Mayor of Liverpool, Steve.
We're both forgetting his name. It's so far. Poor old Steve. Andy Burnham ally. Rotherham?
Steve Rotherham.
Steve Rotherham. We both mind blank. Sorry, Steve Rotherham. We meant no disrespect. But the great legendary mayor of Liverpool and ally of Andy Burnham was quoted today saying,
the street with a little baby today.
And he was quoted as saying that Andy Burnham's looking forward to dealing with Trump. It's a test for him. Is he going to pass this test?
Well, time will tell. The ever unpredictable Donald Trump is not someone I would like to predict how things are going to go with him when they meet for the first time. What I would say is the very first phone call that Andy Burnham did have today was with Donald Trump. The pair did speak. Zeteo UK is now part of the official press corps here in the United Kingdom. So we get the official readouts from Downing Street. So soon after that phone call, I was sent the readout from Downing Street about what the pair spoke about. They spoke about the World Cup, the fact that England did well and that the United States managed to host it well. They spoke about Manchester. I think Donald Trump has said some interesting things about Manchester in the last few days or so online. Andy Burnham said he's looking forward to showing him what Manchester can do. But interestingly, they also spoke about the Middle East and they spoke about the Strait of Hormuz. And that is an indication of how significant of an issue that is for both the United States and the United Kingdom. It is something that is going to keep coming up. We've heard a lot about Andy Burnham not being as focused on foreign policy as previous prime ministers. He's much more focused on domestic policy. We've heard them say that time and time again. You absolutely, under any circumstance, hide away from the fact that foreign policy impacts domestic policy massively. The two are so interconnected.
Yeah.
All these ideas about a 10-year renewal for the United Kingdom, all these ideas about tackling the cost of living crisis, of making our lives better.
It won't be in his hands.
It
won't be in
cannot
his hands.
happen if there are more geopolitical shocks. If the war that is going on with Iran and the United States and Israel continues to escalate, if, as we've heard today, that there is a blockade around Saudi Arabia, if we hear that there are more shortages when it comes to the global oil supply, it will be people in the United Kingdom who will have to pay more for everything, and it will blow every single domestic policy agenda out of the water. So you cannot separate the two. That's a point that Keir Starmer tried to make in one of his final interviews as Prime Minister, as he was sending a parting bit of wisdom to Andy Burnham. This is a huge, huge issue. It's why the President and the Prime Minister spoke about it today. It is going to dominate what happens in number 10, whether they like it or not.
100%. And I think the same applies here in the US, where the president realizes that foreign policy takes over domestic policy. I mean, for a Labour leader, Labour Prime Minister, it's twofold, right? You've got the issue of them losing voters, members of their base, to the Greens, to the Lib Dems, because they are disillusioned over the Labour stance on Gaza. That's one thing. And Andy Burnham's talked about, an apology.
Barely being spoken about.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about his apology, which kind of was a starting point, but doesn't go far enough. And we'll see what policies happening. And Gaza never gets mentioned. But secondly, as you say, there's the events out of his control. He can have an affordability agenda, but none of it will work if oil prices go up through events that he can't control or that he's just a bystander to, which means he does need to focus. And I would point out that he became prime minister on the same day as the Houthis announced that they're escalating by shutting the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea to block off Saudi Arabia's maritime oil exports. Could have massive implications for the global economy. I wonder whether Andy Burnham's team were pulling out maps looking for where Bab el-Mandeb is, but they're going to have to hurry up and find out and take this stuff seriously.
I would say 70% of global oil supply goes through that region. So it's huge.
It's huge. And by the way, you mentioned the call with Trump. Wouldn't you have loved to be a fly on the wall for the first call between Andy Burnham and Donald Trump? I did see Nick Robinson of the BBC interview Morgan McSweeney recently, and McSweeney told a very funny story about them all sitting on speakerphone in Downing Street as Starmer talks to Trump, and Trump ranted about wind turbines and windmills and how foxes were eating all the birds and getting fat, and that meant Britain had lazy foxes, and they all just had to sit there without pissing themselves laughing. So I wonder how Andy Burnham, who's got a bit of a sense of humour himself, bit of a twinkle in his eye, well, how seriously he spoke to our erratic and I would say unhinged president. Let's take a couple more relevant questions from Substack. Aisha Shelley says Labour came in wrong and strong. Everything Starmer promised he went back on. He has been more draconian than the Tories. Is this the same old Keir? Neget Khan says, I'm worried that reappointing Shabana Mahmood means Palestine action will remain banned in the UK. Freedom of speech continues to be under attack. Very good point, Neget. And then there was one more on this topic. Well, let's just deal with those at the moment. Palestine action is something that Keir Starmer will be remembered for, if not by the mainstream media, but by a lot of his former voters, people who turned on him, and a lot of old ladies and vicars who were arrested by the police for supporting, a cause of anti-genocide protest. Andy Burnham managed to get through an entire by-election and a quote-unquote prime ministerial selection. He didn't really contest it, without getting asked at all about issues like this that actually a lot of people do care about. We don't know what Andy Burnham's positions are on civil liberties, free speech, protesting. Is he going to be as hardcore on Palestine action? If he is, then people like Zach Polanski and the Greens will be delighted because they'll keep getting new Labour voters.
Yeah, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. You've sort of answered the question whilst asking me it. We don't know because he hasn't really been asked about it. We ended up in this really interesting scenario where he was running in the by-election quite clearly to become Prime Minister, but when he was asked questions that he didn't want to answer, he could turn around and say, these are huge international or national issues. I am running to be the MP for Makerfield. And he did that quite a few times, so he didn't have to address it then. If there was then a leadership process in which a candidate stood against him, these issues would have come up because there would have been debates, there would have been interviews, there would have been a lot more that would have happened that would have meant that we would have had these questions asked. There's been very little of that. That's why we don't really know where he stands, other than on a few things here and there. We don't really have a clue about what his policy positions are. That's the struggle that we all have at the moment. We are somewhat guessing. What I would say is there has been little to no coverage about his policies when it comes to Gaza.
Yeah.
What we do know is that Keir Starmer lost a significant amount of support to other progressive parties because of his handling of Gaza and because of some of the comments he made. It's clear that Andy Burnham knows that was a mistake. That's why he offered a very carefully worded apology to The Guardian. What that apology didn't include was policy. Sorry is not a policy. We don't have any policy yet. We don't know where Andy Burnham stands when it comes to arms sales to Israel. We don't know where he stands when it comes to sanctions. We don't know where he stands when it comes to surveillance flights that the RAF have been doing for Israeli intelligence. We have absolutely no idea. We won't know until the time comes and he wants to tell us, because he's managed to get the keys to number 10 without actually nailing his positions to the mast.
Do you think that's going to come back and bite him in the arse? Because it gives Labour MPs an easy get out a year from now, 6 months from now. He's doing badly in the polls, say. His agenda's not getting through Parliament. And they say, well, you know what? We never got to choose. We never got a choice. He just came in. He was installed. It was a coronation. He never won a general election. And then we got him in from a by-election and Starmer got, no one asked me. And it gives those MPs an opportunity to say, wash their hands of Andy Burnham very, very quickly.
I'm going to sort of flip that question and say, is there also a possibility that when he makes difficult decisions, he says, I never said I wasn't going to do this?
Yeah.
Because that's the flip side. He is in this unique position where no matter what he does, he will not be held to a standard.
Usually, there's no manifesto. He didn't rely on any kind of manifesto.
No. And usually when a prime minister does something that people don't like, we say, hold on, you said you were going to do this, now you've done this, this is a massive U-turn. We can't say that with Andy Burnham because he'll say, it's not my manifesto, I didn't write it, I didn't even stand on it. They're saying at the moment they're going to honour the 2024 manifesto, but he didn't write it, he wasn't part of that process. So he's in this really unique position where he can actually turn around quite frequently and change his positions and say, actually, I never said I was going to do any of that. But equally, but it's exactly what you said, the MPs might turn around and say, hold on, we didn't say you could do this. We didn't know you were going to do this. We're not supportive of it. I don't think they're going to do that because they are desperate to beat reform. They are desperate to make sure they save their seats. And they now know there is no one else other than Andy Burnham who might have a chance of doing
There's
that.
There's no more kings across the water coming to rescue them. No more white knights from outside of Parliament. Hyperflow says, how is it possible? On Hyperflow on Substack, nice name. It says, how is it possible for someone to walk in uncontested to become PM? And we're still questioning what his policies are. Is all you need these days charisma? That's what led to Boris Johnson. Kind of did. I hope he does well, but I find this baffling. Nobody knows what he intends to do. That is our parliamentary system. Helen Hills says, what would it mean to pass the test with Trump? Let's hope Burnham follows Mamdani. I mean, I saw some reporting that Burnham's team were leaning into this idea that they could be like Zoran Mamdani and have that kind of relationship of mutual respect, even though they don't necessarily have to agree on everything.
Yeah, I spoke to someone close to the Burnham camp last week who said they were literally looking at exactly how Mamdani had operated around Donald Trump, how they seem to respect each other even if they don't agree on policy, and that's the model they wanted to pick after. Whether or not that will be possible, we don't know. Donald Trump is erratic. Donald Trump is unpredictable. It's very difficult to say. The big question is going to be something that Donald Trump doesn't have to deal with Mamdani about is the use of British bases when it comes to the Iran war. Those are not conversations they have to have. There is no moment in which Donald Trump has to pick up the phone and ask the mayor of New York whether or not he can do something. That conversation is... Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, well, just today, we're speaking on a day where Donald Trump's put out a Truth Social post telling Mamdani he cannot arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump will not allow it, and he doesn't have the power to do it, but he does love Mamdani. I've often said, find yourself someone who looks at you the way Donald Trump looks at Mamdani. He looks at Mamdani the way he doesn't even look at Melania Trump. I would point out, Andy Burnham's, again, I'm not joking. People are going to think I'm joking. I'm deadly serious here. Part of Andy Burnham's relationship with Trump will depend on how much Trump is impressed by his charm, his charisma, and his looks. Trump is obsessed with people's looks. He hires people based on how they look. Do they look TV friendly? Is this a movie star look? Do they look like a character in a movie when they're playing defense secretary? That's how he appointed his cabinet. When he met Mamdani, he said to Mamdani, you're better looking in person. So, he's obsessed with this. It'll be very interesting to see how he rates Andy Burnham, dare I say.
There's been a lot of talk about Andy Burnham's eyelashes and his blue T-shirt or his black
And Trump will have been
t-shirt, so-
across it, I can assure you. Trump
Yeah,
will have been
so-
reading that. He will be getting that talk. Dakota Collar says, Matt Kennard, the independent journalist, called Andy Burnham a snake because he'll say whatever he thinks people want to hear to get power. Do you agree? Well, a lot of politicians do that. Shab, I think I'm going to preempt your answer and say you did say earlier, we have to wait and see. I guess it will be a very quick test of whether Burnham is some conviction politician who actually means what he says, is actually going to go through with some kind of change, or is it just going to be more of the same Starmerism with a northern accent, as people put it?
Yeah, look, I know I keep saying it, but it's because we've not really seen anything from Andy Burnham on a national level for a very long period of time. What we do know is that Andy Burnham has changed his politics quite a bit over the years. There's that famous joke that gets thrown about quite a lot, whether about him being a Brownite, a Corbynite, a Blairite, a Starmerite. He's been everything over the years. What he would argue is that he has been loyal to the Labour Party for quite some time. He has claimed he has been loyal to every Labour leader. I suggest, and I would suspect Keir Starmer thinks very differently when it comes to that conclusion. What we do know about Andy Burnham is that he is a serial winner. He has won in Manchester multiple times. He is very popular there. That is the reason why Labour MPs have gravitated towards him. Donald Trump likes a winner as well. That could be something that Andy Burnham uses to try and win over his respect. He's won 3 mayoral elections very handsomely. The question now for Andy Burnham is what type of Prime Minister he will be. He keeps talking about being transformative, but being transformative means that you have to go against the status quo. And when you go against the status quo, there is significant pushback. If he tries not to do that, he will be accused of not delivering on his promises. He's going to find himself in a very tricky position. There's been one major pledge that we've heard today. On the steps of Downing Street, he said he's going to eradicate homelessness in the United Kingdom. We are the 5th richest country in the world. We should not have homelessness in the United Kingdom.
Let's play that clip.